Hello everyone. Today our topic of discussion is resource depletion and overexploitation of natural resources. So the slogan here is save natural resources to save the nature. The content of discussion are depletion of resources, environmental impact, non-natural causes of wetland degradation, exploitation of natural resources, consequences and mitigation. So to start with, what is depletion of resources? Resource depletion is basically the consumption of resource faster than it can be replenished. For example, if we are using fossil fuels, so we are using them at a rate which is faster than it can get replenished because it takes millions and millions of years to form fossil fuels. Now, natural resources are commonly divided between renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Use of either of the form of resources beyond their rate of replacement is considered as resource depletion. So, if it goes on like this, we will end up with our natural resources soon. See, the value of resource is direct result of its availability in nature and the cost of extracting the resource. The more a resource is depleted, the more the value of the resources increases because the market depends upon the demand and supply. For example, there is this resource we are using wood, but now the logging is very less. So there will be less wood in the market. So the cost of this wood will increase drastically. There are several types of resource depletion. The most known being right now is the aquifer depletion, deforestation, mining of fossil fuels and minerals, pollution or contamination of resources, slash and burn, agricultural practices, soil erosion, overconsumption, etc. Now, resource depletion is most commonly used in reference with farming, fishing, mining, water usage, and consumption of fossil fuels. Depletion of wildlife population is known as defaunation, because we talk about flora and fauna, and from this fauna the word defaunation is derived. Now, talking about the accounts for this depletion accounting. Now, in an effort to offset the depletion of resources, various scientists and theorists have come up with depletion accounting, or better known as green accounting, so that the accounts, like we normally maintain our accounts in the business, so this will be green accounting. So, depletion accounting aims to account for nature's value of an equal footing with the market economy. Like for example, if nature is giving us something, like for example there is drinking water, so we are getting it free from the nature. But if the fresh water resources deplete, water depletes, we have to desalinate the water and drink. So what will be the cost of that desalination? This is how we see account for nature's value on an equal footing with the market economy. Now, resource depletion accounting uses data provided from countries to estimate the adjustments needed due to their use and depletion of natural capital available to them. This is important because once any resource is depleted, we have to find the alternate, maybe some artificial resource. Now, what will be the value of that artificial resource? What kind of loss we are going to face in future? This is what we do in accounting for depletion. Natural capital are natural resources such as mineral deposits or timber stocks. Depletion accounting factors in several different influences such as number of years until resource exhaustion, the cost of resource extraction, and the demand of the resource. Now, resource extraction industries make up a large part of economic activity in developing countries. This in turn leads to higher levels of resource depletion and environmental degradation in developing countries. So, measurement of social value is sought through ecosystem services, which are defined as the benefits of nature to households, communities, and the economies. Now, talking about the minerals depletion, because as I told you, right now depletion is more in the farming sector, mining sector and the mineral sector also. So let's talk about the minerals depletion. Minerals are needed to provide food, clothing and housing. A United States Geological Survey study, they have found significant long-term trend over 20th century for non-renewable resources such as minerals. Minerals are your non-renewable resources. They supply greater proportion of raw material inputs to the non-fuel, non-food sector of the economy. For example, there is a greater consumption of crushed stone, sand and gravel which is used in construction, because stone, gravel and construction is not being used in your food and fuel. So they are non-fuel, non-food sector of the economy and they are contributing a lot towards it. Now, large-scale exploitation of minerals, it began in Industrial Revolution around 1760 in England and has grown rapidly ever since. Now, technological improvements have allowed humans to dig deeper and access lower grades in different types of ore over the time. So, virtually all basic industrial metals, whether it is copper or it is iron or it is bauxite as well as rare earth minerals, they face production output limitations from time to time because supply involves large upfront investments and is therefore slow to respond to rapid increases in the demand. So there are certain future projections also. So minerals projected by some of that they will enter production decline during next 20 years, that they will decline. So these minerals are your gasoline. So they say it will decline by 2023. Then your copper, 2024, zinc. So this is in 20 years, these three. Now there are certain minerals projected by some to enter production decline during present century, any time in this present century. So these are your aluminium by 2057, coal in 2060, iron by 2068. So such projections may change as new discoveries are made and typically misinterpret available data on mineral resources and mineral reserves. But however, these are the data for the present decline in these metals, minerals. Now talking about oil. So there is a term known as peak oil. Peak oil is basically a period when maximum rate of global petroleum extraction is reached. Like right now, it is the maximum extraction which is being taken place, after which the rate of production will undergo long-term decline. So the graph goes like this, the increasing oil extraction. Here you will reach the peak time, peak extraction, and after this it will decline. The extraction, the production will decline. So there is this report which concluded that decreased supply combined with increasing demand will significantly increase worldwide prices. This is how the economy works. When there is something lesser in the market, its cost rises up. So same will happen with the natural resources, that most significant will be the availability and price of liquid fuel. So who will be at loss? The poor people. The rich people will anyway pay the more prices and get the things. So the most significant will be the availability and the price of liquid fuel for the transportation. As peaking is approached, liquid fuel prices and price volatility will increase dramatically, as I told you, and without timely mitigation, the economic, social and political cost will be unprecedented. Viable mitigation options exist on both the supply and demand sides, but to have substantial impact, they must be initiated more than a decade in advancing of peaking. Now talking about deforestation. Deforestation is the clearing of forests by cutting or burning of trees and plants in a forested area. As a result of deforestation, presently about 1/2 of the forests that once covered the earth have been destroyed completely. It occurs for many different reasons and it has several negative implications on the atmosphere and the quality of land in and surrounding the forest. Now there are various causes and environmental impact of deforestation. So I'm not talking in detail about deforestation because I've talked about it in various lectures in this series. Now one of the main cause of deforestation is clearing forest for agricultural reasons. As the population is increasing with time, especially of the developing areas, especially near the rainforest, it is increasing the need for land. So more land is needed for farming, and it is becoming more and more important also. For most of the people, a forest has no value when its resources are not being used. So the incentives to deforest these areas outweigh the incentives to preserve the forest. For this reason, the economic values of the forest is very important for the developing countries. Now talking about the environmental impact, because deforestation is so extensive, it has made several significant impacts on the environment, which includes your carbon dioxide production, increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, changing water cycle, increase in soil erosion, and there is a decrease in biodiversity also. So deforestation is often cited as a contributor to the global warming, because trees and plants remove carbon dioxide and they emit oxygen into the atmosphere. The reduction of these forests, they contribute to around 12% of anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. One of the most pressing issues that deforestation creates is your soil erosion. The removal of these trees, they cause higher rates of erosion, which increases the risk of your landslides, which is a direct threat to many people living close to deforested areas. As forests get destroyed, so does the habitat for millions of animals. So it is estimated that 80% of the world's known biodiversity, it lives in the rainforest, and the destruction of these rainforests is accelerating the extinction at an alarming rate. So we need to control the deforestation. Now talking about the wetlands. So wetlands are a non-renewable resource. They cannot be renewed on a human time scale. So everything we talk about renewable and non-renewable, we talk with respect to human time scale, and in some environments it cannot be renewed also. Recent studies indicate that global loss of wetlands, there is lots of global loss of wetlands, which is as high as 87% since 1700 AD, with 64% of wetland loss occurring since 1900. Some loss of wetlands resulted from natural causes. These natural causes as soil erosion, sedimentation, subsidence, and the rise in the sea level. See, wetlands are basically the ecosystems that are often saturated by enough surface or groundwater to sustain the vegetation that is usually adapted to saturated soil conditions. For example, red maples, peat moss, cranberries, wild rice. Because some varieties of wetlands are rich in minerals and nutrients, they provide many of the advantages to both land and water environments. They contain diverse species and provide distinct bases of food chain. So basically your wetlands habitats, they contribute to environmental health and biodiversity also. Now wetland provide environmental services. So what kind of environmental services? For example, food and habitat. They improve the water quality, commercial fishing, shoreline stabilization, and recreation. Now, what are the resources in wetlands? Some of the world's most successful agricultural areas are wetlands. They are the most successful agricultural areas which have been drained and converted to farmland for large-scale agricultural practices. So large-scale draining of wetlands also occurs for real estate development and urbanization. So this is like really bad. In contrast, in some cases, these wetlands also flooded to be converted recreational lakes or hydropower generation. So we are talking that how wetlands are converted into other things for human needs. In some countries, ranchers have also moved their property into wetlands for grazing due to nutrient-rich vegetation there. Now, wetlands in South America also prove a fruitful resource for the poachers, as animals with valuable hides such as there are jaguars, wolves, very important snakes are drawn to wetlands. So these poachers go there to attack them and destroy the wetlands and the biodiversity present there. So human benefit from wetland in indirect ways as well. Wetlands act as natural water filters when runoff from the either natural or man-made processes pass through. If a wetland is between an agricultural zone and a freshwater ecosystem, fertilizer runoff will be absorbed by the wetland and used to fuel the slow processes that happen. By the time the water reaches the freshwater ecosystem, there won't be enough fertilizer to cause destructive algal blooms that poison freshwater ecosystem. Now, talking about non-natural causes of wetland degradation. So the non-natural causes are like hydrologic alteration, then there is drainage, dredging, stream channelization. So let's talk about them one by one. So let's start with drainage. First of all, we need to understand, to preserve the resources extracted from wetlands, current strategies are to rank wetlands and prioritize the conservation of wetlands with more environmental services. They create more efficient irrigation for wetlands being used for agricultural and restricting access to wetlands by tourists. Now, talking about the drainage. Drainage is the natural or artificial removal of the surface water and subsurface water from an area with excess of water. The internal drainage of most agricultural soil is good enough to prevent severe waterlogging. Next is your dredging. Dredging is the operation of removing material from one part of the water environment and relocating it to another. In all but a few situations, the excavation is undertaken by a specialist floating plant known as dredger. So these are the non-natural causes of wetland degradation. By these activities, we are destroying the wetlands. Next is your stream channelization. So this is also known as river engineering. River engineering is the process of planned human intervention in the course, characteristics or flow of a river with the intention of producing some defined benefit. People have intervened in the natural course and behavior of rivers since before reported history. Next is your water landing, or which is known as ditching. So water landing is also used as euphemism for crash landing into water and aircraft not designed for the purpose, or event formally termed ditching. So in this case, the flight crew knowingly make a controlled emergency landing on water. Ditching of commercial aircraft is a rare occurrence. So water landing in the broad sense, a landing on the body of water, for example float planes or water as a matter of course. Then talking about leaves. So these leaves is an elongated, naturally occurring ridge or artificially constructed filler wall which regulates water levels. It is usually earthen and often parallel to the course of river in its floodplain. Then deposition of your fill materials. So this is fill dirt. This is usually subsoil and underlying soil parent material which has little soil, organic matter or biological activity. So this fill dirt is taken from a location where soil is being removed as a part of leveling an area for construction. It may also contain sand, rocks and stones as well as earth. Now talking about stream diversion or a diversion dam. It is a dam that diverts all or a portion of the flow of river from its natural course. Diversion dams do not generally impound water in a reservoir. Instead, the water is diverted into an artificial water course or a canal which may be used for irrigation. Then your groundwater drainage, or you can say waterable control. It is a practice of controlling the height of water table by drainage. Its main applications are in agricultural land and in cities to manage extensive underground infrastructure that includes the foundation of large buildings, underground transit systems and extensive utilities. Then impoundment or what is known as a dam. Dam is a barrier that stops or restricts the flow of water or underground streams. Reservoirs created by dams not only suppress floods but also provide water for activities such as irrigation, human consumption, industrial use, etc. Then there are a few other also. For example, urbanization and urban development. It refers to the population shift from the rural areas to the urban areas, the gradual increase in the proportion of people living in urban areas. Then your marinas or boats. So your marina is basically a dock or a basin with moorings and supplies for yachts and small boats. A marina differs from a port is that marina does not handle large passenger ships or cargo for the freighters. Then industrialization. So it all started with your industrial revolution, which led to the development of factories for large scale production with consequent changes in the society, your electricity grid, assembly line, etc. Then talking about agriculture. Agriculture was a key development in the rise of sedentary human civilization, whereby farming of domesticated species created food surpluses. Silviculture. It is the practice of controlling the growth, composition, health and quality of forests to meet diverse needs and values. Then mining. It is extraction of your valuable minerals. And then atmospheric deposition. So this word is deposition. So in aerosol physics, deposition basically it is the process by which aerosol particles collect or deposit themselves on the solid surfaces, decreasing the concentration of particles in the air. So now we have discussed these are the non-natural causes for the wetland degradation. Now we will talk about the groundwater. Water is an essential resource needed to survive everyday life. Historically, water has had a profound influence on a nation's prosperity and success around the world. Groundwater is a water that is in saturated zones underground. The upper surface of saturated zone is known as water table. Now, of the groundwater used for agriculture, 16 to 33% is non-renewable. It is estimated that since 1960s, groundwater extraction has more than doubled, which has increased groundwater depletion. Due to this increase in depletion, in most of the depleted areas, use of groundwater for irrigation has become impossible for post-prohibitive. So, groundwater acts as a non-renewable resource. So, it is totally considered as non-renewable resource because less than 6% of water around the world is replenished and renewed on human time scale of 50 years. So, people are already using non-renewable water that is thousands of years old. In areas like Egypt, they are using water that may have been renewed millions of years ago, which is not renewable on human time scales. So there are environmental impacts of such depletion of groundwater also, because overusing groundwater, old or young, can lower the subsurface water levels and dry up the streams, which could have huge effect on the ecosystem on the surface. When the most easily recoverable fresh groundwater is removed, this leaves residual with inferior water quality. This is in part with induced leakage from land surface, confining layers or adjacent aquifers that contain saline or contaminated water. So worldwide, the magnitude of groundwater depletion from storage may be so large as to constitute a measurable contributor to the sea level rise. So we have to look for the mitigation. See, water is an essential resource needed to survive everyday life, and groundwater is water that is saturated zones underground. The upper surface of saturated zone is called water table. So groundwater can either flow naturally out of rock materials or can be pumped out. So globally, there is 22.6 million cubic kilometers of groundwater available, and only 0.35 million of that is renewable. We need to keep this in our mind. Now let's shift our discussion towards exploitation of natural resources. The exploitation of natural resources is the use of natural resources for economic growth, sometimes with a negative connotation for accompanying environmental degradation. We already talked about the resource depletion, where we are using the resources with a greater rate than they can replace themselves or replenish themselves. Then this term exploitation, so it is in terms with the economic growth, obviously in your negative connotation, because with overexploitation it is accompanied by environmental degradation. So it started to emerge on an industrial scale in the 19th century as the extraction and processing of raw materials. So raw materials, they include your mining, steam power, machinery. So it developed much further than it had in pre-industrial areas. Now, talking about the 20th century, energy consumption rapidly increased. Today, about 80% of the world's energy consumption is sustained by extraction of fossil fuels, which consists your oil, coal, gas. Another non-renewable resource that is exploited by humans is your subsoil minerals, such as your precious metals that are mainly used in the production of industrial commodities. Intensive agriculture is also an example of mode of production that hinders many aspects of natural environment, for example, degradation of forest, in a terrestrial ecosystem, water pollution. But as the world population rises and economic growth occurs, the depletion of natural resource influenced by unsustainable extraction of raw materials, it becomes an increasing concern. So there are a lot of resources under pressure. So the question is, why resources are under pressure? Increase in the sophistication of technology, which enables natural resources to be extracted quickly and efficiently. For example, in the past, it could take long hours just to cut down one tree only using saws. People used to use saws. Due to increased technology, rates of deforestation have greatly increased. So that is why the resources are under pressure. Next, the number of humans is increasing. According to UN, there were 7.6 billion of us in 2017. This number is expected to rise to 10 billion in 2050 and 11 billion by 2100. Cultures of consumerism. Now, materialistic views lead to mining of gold, diamonds to produce jewelry, unnecessary commodities for human life or advancement. Consumerism also leads to extraction of resources for production of commodities necessary for human life, but in amounts excessive to what is needed, because people consume more than is necessary or waste what they have. So excessive demand often leads to conflicts due to intense competition. Organizations such as Global Witness and the United Nations have documented this connection that we talked about. And next, why there is pressure? Because there is non-equitable distribution of resources. Somewhere a lot of resources are there, and there are lesser resources. So there are consequences of the exploitation of resources. Natural resources are not limitless, and the following consequences can arise from the careless and excessive consumption of these resources. We already talked about deforestation. Once again, deforestation, clear cutting is a removal of your forest or stand of trees from land, which then converted to a non-forest use. So your deforestation can involve conversion of your forest into farms, ranches, or urban use. Desertification. So your desertification is type of land degradation in which a relatively dry area of land becomes a desert, typically losing its bodies of water as well as vegetation and wildlife. It is caused by a variety of factors. Then your extinction of species. We know about Holocene extinction. Otherwise, it is referred to as sixth mass extinction. or Anthropocene extinction. It is current event and is one of the most significant extinction events in the history of Earth. This ongoing extinction of species coincides with the present Holocene epoch and is result of human activity. This large number of extinctions spans numerous families of plants and animals, including mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles and arthropods. Then your forced migration. Forced displacement or forced immigration is the coerced movement of a person or people away from their home or home region, and it often connotes violent coercion. Then soil erosion is the action of surface processes that removes your soil rock. We already talked about it. We talked about oil depletion also. Oil depletion is a decline in the oil production as well as oil field or geographic area. Then there are a few more, like ozone depletion. It consists of two related events. We have observed in the late 1970s a steady lowering about 4% in the total amount of ozone in Earth's atmosphere. Greenhouse gas increase. Greenhouse gas that absorbs and emits radiant energy within the thermal infrared range. Then extreme energy, water pollution, natural hazards and disasters, we have separately talked about them. Metals and minerals depletion also. So we have talked about these consequences in our various lectures also. So now comes about your overdrafting. Overdrafting is a process of extracting groundwater beyond the equilibrium yield of the aquifer. These are two sets of yields: safe yield and sustainable yield. However, it has impacts on the environment. So the environmental impact of overdrafting, it includes your land subsidence. So land subsidence is the collapse of land from lack of support. The first recorded case of land subsidence was in 1940s. Land subsidence can be as little as a local land collapsing or as large as an entire region's land being lowered. Now, lowering of water table, which makes water harder to reach streams and rivers. Then there is reduction of water volume in streams and lakes because their supply of water is being diminished by surface water recharging the aquifers. Animals that depend on streams and lakes for food and water and habitat will be affected. Degrading water quality. The cost of water to the consumer is also rising. This is due to water table lowering, so more energy is needed to pump further down, and to cover the pumping, companies need more profit. Crop production is decreasing from lack of water. That is 60% of US irrigation relies on groundwater. Groundwater depletion also throws off the water cycle and effect on the climate. So when we talk about the effect on the climate, the aquifer drawdown or overdrafting and the pumping of fossil water may be a contributing factor to sea level rise also, because by increasing the amount of moisture available to fall as precipitation, severe weather events are more likely to occur, and to some extent moisture in the atmosphere accelerates the probability of a global warming event also. So there is overexploitation. Now overexploitation or overharvesting refers to harvesting of renewable resource to a point of diminishing returns. Continued overexploitation can lead to destruction of the resource. The term applies to all the natural resources, be it wild medicinal plants, grazing, pastures, game animals, fish stocks, forest, water aquifers, etc. Now, if we talk about fisheries, fish stocks are said to be collapse if their biomass declines by more than 95% for their maximum historical biomass. Even though fishing has ceased, the cod stocks have failed to recover. The absence of cod as an apex predator in many areas has led to trophic cascades. About 25% of the world fisheries are now overexploited to the point where their current biomass is less than the level that maximizes their sustainable yield. These depleted fisheries can often recover if fishing pressure is reduced until the stock biomass returns to the optimal biomass. So then there are water resources, overexploitation of the water resources also. such as lakes and aquifers are usually renewable resources which naturally recharge. Overexploitation occurs if water resources such as Ogallala aquifer is mined or extracted at a rate that exceeds the recharge rate. That is, at a rate that exceeds the practical sustained yield. Recharge usually comes from area, streams, rivers and lakes. Next is your forest resources, which are overexploited when they are logged at a rate faster than reforestation takes place. Reforestation competes with other land uses such as food production, livestock grazing and living space for further economic growth also. In developing countries, almost 3 billion people rely on wood for heating and cooking. So short-term economic gains made by conversion of forests to agriculture or overexploitation of wood products, it typically leads to long loss of income. West Africa, Madagascar, Southeast Asia and many other regions have experienced lower revenue because of overexploitation and the consequent declining timber harvest. Then there is obviously loss in your biodiversity. You will lose a lot of your plant and animal species in an uncontrolled manner. And one of the key health issues associated with biodiversity is drug discovery and availability of medicinal resources. A significant proportion of drugs are natural products derived directly or indirectly from biological sources. So marine ecosystems are of particular interest in this regard. However, unregulated and inappropriate bioprospecting could potentially lead to overexploitation, ecosystem degradation and loss of biodiversity. Then there are endangered species. Overexploitation threatens 1/3 of the endangered vertebrates as well as the other groups, excluding your edible fish. So all living organisms require resources to survive. Overexploitation of these resources are protracted periods can deplete natural stocks to the point where they are unable to recover within short time frame. So humans have always harvested food and other resources they have needed to survive. Now with an exponential increase in the human population, you see everywhere human population is one of the reason. Expanding markets and increased demand combined with improved access and techniques for capture are causing exploitation. Overall, 50 bird species have become extinct since 1500, have been subjected to overexploitation. So 40% of total have been extinct. Let me give you some examples. For example, great auk. It was a penguin-like bird of north. It was hunted for its feather, meat, fat and oil. They have been subject to overexploitation. Giant otter, mollusks, all are facing overexploitation. Your tropical fishes, Asian black bear. Chinese medicines, bears, tigers, rhinos, they use all these animals in their traditional medicines also. And there are many species which are affected by overexploitation. They include your international trade in fur, chinchilla, giant otter, cat species, insect collectors, horticulturists, New Zealand stiletto, shell collectors, aquarium hobbyists. So here the tropical fish and mollusks. Chinese medicines, they're using different animals, novelty pets, snakes, parrots, primates and big cats. So there are cascade effects of this overexploitation. So overexploitation of species can result in knock-on or cascade effects. This can particularly apply if through exploitation a habitat lost its apex predator. Because of the loss of top predator, a dramatic increase in their prey species can occur. In turn, unchecked prey can then overexploit their food resources until population numbers dwindle, possibly to the point of extinction. So a classic example for cascade effects occurred in sea otters. So what happened? Starting before 17th century and not phased out until 1911, sea otters were hunted aggressively for their exceptionally warm and valuable pelts, which could fetch lot of money. So this caused cascade effects through the kelp forests. So these kelp forest ecosystems along the Pacific coast of North America. One of the sea otter's primary food source is the sea urchin. So primary food source is sea urchin. When hunters caused sea otter population to decline, an ecological release of sea urchin populations occurred. Their population started increasing. The sea urchin then overexploited their main food source. So for the sea urchins, main food source were the kelps, creating urchin barrens, areas of seabed denuded of kelp but carpeted with urchins. So no longer having food to eat, sea urchin became locally extinct. So sea urchin became locally extinct. So this is how the cascade is like so many things are connected with each other. So if there is a problem in one of them, the effect will trickle down, right? So for example, here the three otters, they used to feed on the sea urchins. So when there were no sea otters present, there will be the lot of sea urchins. So all the sea urchins need lot of food. For their food, they depend upon the kelp. So they start destroying the kelps. So once their food resources exhausted, they became locally extinct. Also, since kelp forest ecosystems are home to many other species, the loss of kelp caused other cascade effects, which is known as secondary extinction. So this is very important example. So likewise, we talk about fishing. There is environmental impact of fishing also. The environmental impact of fishing includes issues such as availability of fish, overfishing, fisheries, fish management, etc. Then there are effects on the marine habitat also. Some fishing techniques cause habitat destruction. Blast fishing, cyanide fishing, which are illegal in many places, harm surrounding habitat. There is environmental impact of the mining also, which can occur at local, regional and global scales through direct and indirect mining practices. Impacts can result, as I talk about, erosion, sinkholes, loss of biodiversity, contamination of soil and groundwater, etc. So we have to look for the mitigation. So current societies respond to water resource depletion by shifting management of objectives from location and developing new supplies to augmenting, conserving and reallocation of existing supplies. So there are two different perspectives to groundwater depletion. The first is that depletion is considered literally and simply as a reduction in the volume of water in the saturated zone, regardless of water quality considerations. So we have to conserve our natural resources. We have to protect them from overexploitation so that we can leave our resources for the future generation also. So this is all about today's lecture. If you have any comments, you can tell me in the comment section. Thank you.